Good afternoon, Ken and Andy. Let's take a look at this week's internet weather. Only difference this time from the previous weeks is instead of doing from previous Monday to this Monday, we are doing from Sunday to Sunday because of the movement of internet weather. But for this reason, we are doing it until September 19th. And here is the top 10, what we are seeing on our common backbone as the most probed ports. Here, there are no surprises a little bit from the last week in the sense the top position is taken by the Telnet port 23 TCP, which was basically at number 2 position, and it swapped positions with protocol 47, which is GRE. And 3 and 4, 3 is for ICMP, which is sometimes related to ICMP, as well as most often times some sort of backscatter traffic. At number 5 is 22 TCP for SSH port, followed by SSL 443 TCP. And 7 and 8 is basically 2375 and 2376. These two ports go together and they're associated with the MikroTik devices. I think one is for Winbox API and another for, access to the admin port. 53 UDP is for the DNS and 81 TCP is the alternate HTTP port. But even though it's associated with the alternate HTTP port, it's most frequently used by various IoT-based botnets. And let's take a look at one of the top ports. In this case, we are looking at 23 TCP here. We are looking at the past 90 days of traffic. The reason I wanted to show this is the variations in the traffic. Like you see, I think around end of third week and maybe start of the fourth week of last month, there was a little bit of a dip in the scan flows, basically scanning activity occurring on this port. And there's a little bit of a drop in packet for one day at the start of this month. So other than that, it seems to be the levels seems to be at appropriate levels in the sense there's not much deviations except for that maybe 4 to 5 days worth of data. So moving on, looking at the number of scanners in the sense how many unique scan sips are happening on this specific port at any point of time, for example, looking for any open port 23 TCP. Again, we are looking at the past 90 days, and more or less the levels are at the same level. And which is interesting to me is if we go back, I'm not seeing corresponding decrease in the number of sources around during the same time as occurred here, for example, around 824 to maybe end of that month. But there's a little bit drop, but nothing much. I don't know what to make of it. By looking at it, there's not much difference. I think maybe maybe internet loss, maybe a couple of scanners, maybe those might be the aggressive scanners doing the scanning for this port. Maybe they went offline. It's also possible maybe one of the botnets may went down dark prior to basically coming up with new tactics. It's undetermined, but it's interesting to see that the corresponding change is not reflected in the scan sources.
Yeah, I do want to mention also, Ganesh, it's also very inconsistent. Like there's really no rhyme or reason or pattern that you can discern here. It just sort of seems really random. So, and you're right, they don't correspond with each other where there's a dip in one, and there's not really the same volume of dip in the other. So I don't know, it's something like this, maybe, I don't know, Telnet's pretty common, so maybe we're just seeing a lot of noise or something, but it's interesting that it's not a consistent pattern on either front.
There could be a lot of different automated scripts running.
Yeah.
And, not necessarily at the same time. So, there might be depending on where or what times they got kicked off, who knows how it really impacts what the ebb and flow looks like in something that large.
Yeah, that's what my thoughts were, but I couldn't able to come up with a good conclusion. But nevertheless, it's really interesting. Probably we may discover something related to that change, or maybe we should call it anomaly for that specific drop. But one thing is, if I've seen a drop corresponding to this one in the Unix sources, there's a correlation. Okay, maybe some effort has been taking place, and that resulted in the drop in place. But it's an underjudgment mistake. Let's see what happens in the coming weeks. And moving on to the next one. This is a little interesting. These are the scans, basically number of scanners. I just picked one of the best reports to see how many Unix sources are there. Like you see in this graph, basically they're very widely spread all across the globe. For example, all the South and North Americas are covered with various scanners, as well as from Asia Pac region and also subcontinent of India. Basically, there's so many scanners. I mean, it's not surprising, but to see so widely distributed is concerning. Moving on to basically the next high port in our top list is the GRE, which is protocol 47. In this case, I believe I was looking at the past 30 days to start with. As you can see, just last week, I think around 909 or 908, I think there was a huge jump in scan flows as well as the flows volume for this specific port. I'll explain what protocol 47 is, what it's used for, commonly known for, what could be the reasons, based on a little bit analysis I did. Maybe probably you guys can weigh in, some additional inputs to the increase. So while I'm looking at it, I kind of remembered, I think a few months ago, there was actually a big jump in protocol 47 activity, which I think at the time I was able to come up with and show on the ThreatTraq. So basically, I went back and grabbed some of those graphs from that ThreatTraq episode and kind of showed to what's a compare and contrast to present scenario. At the time, I think it's right at the end of May, at the start of June, basically there was a big jump in this GRE protocol activity. As such, I think almost there was non-existent traffic, and our common backbone probes actually picked up a huge increase. The top one is basically showing the scan flows volume, and the bottom graph basically is showing how many Unix sources are involved. I think in this case, at the peak, I think there was about 4,000 scanner IPs, I believe, per hour. So at the time, one of the graphs has shown about 2,400 scanners were involved with a geographical distribution similar to the 23, but the concentration is low. But most of them are concentrated in North American region, and there could be a reason for that one. But I'll touch base while we're going forward. And again, coming back to the current, today's scanners, there were about 2,200 addresses seen. At the time, actually 2,348. About, I think there's a difference of about maybe 100 to 150 IP addresses in the number of scanners. Seems like pretty consistent. But coming back, what is this activity? So I kind of expanded the timeline to see the initial GRE spike we've seen maybe a couple of months ago to the current one. So the current one is at this peak. Actually, if you see from the start of the graph as well as the current graph, there's a marked difference. What happened at that time is there was a sustained spike for maybe a couple of days, afterwards kind of tapered down, but still it's above the norms at that time. That kind of activity continued for some time with the occasional huge spikes happening once or twice. But what happened is, again, after maybe at the start of this month, there was a huge jump in activity happened at the time. And afterwards, actually, even though it's kind of slowing down a little bit, what's happening is the levels are much, much higher, more pronounced. So these are some timelines I'm trying to see maybe it makes sense or not. But recently, we know around this time, there was maybe largest DDoS attack ever recorded, maybe ever noticed, right, by this new botnet called Maris, which is based on, I think it's an incarnation of Mirai code base. Of course, most of the IoT botnets are borrowed some other functionality from Mirai, right? So what this Mirai did is it had performed a huge DDoS attack against Yandex, which is a Russian-based company, kind of Google, with about, I think, almost 22 million response packets per second, which is a huge. So even though they did not mention there's a ZRE flooding associated with, but there was a huge attack happened, but there, I think, multi-vector DDoS attack happened. So maybe it's a coincidence. We are seeing traffic on this at this time. And based on that information, what I tried to do is I was trying to see, is there anything happened around that time at the start of June? This is a kind of just a note. It's not confirmed, but I think sometime in June, Cloudflare said that they mitigated the largest attack at that time, which was not that off by compared to Mary's one, but they had, I think, they mitigated about 17 million RPS sized attack. But the timeline is a little vague in the sense at the time they said the early start of the summer, we mitigated the largest attack ever. And they kind of revealed to the public, I think maybe after 2-3 weeks, maybe a month afterwards. So the timeline is, I'm not sure, but I think it can be done whenever some sort of a huge DDoS attacks happening. They might be including ZRE also. That's some of the background on it. And coming back, what's this protocol 47? As I said, it's a GRE, which is basically used for generic root encapsulation. And the most prominent feature, most prominent feature is it's a stateless protocol. Most frequently used for VPNs, and we all know during the pandemic, everybody is onto the VPN. And also access to a VPN point will give actually foothold to the corporate networks. That's one of the reasons also it's one of the prime targets by various threat actors. What it also does, it also used for encapsulation of other protocols. For example, the good example would be IPv6 tunneling. Because there are so many IPv4 based devices, maybe most of the devices talk with IPv4. How do you connect IPv6 to IPv4? That handshaking, maybe handshaking and everything will be done through the encapsulation, which is done by the protocol 47. As I said, the large volumes of DDoS traffic can be generated by use of GRE. And it's typically used by Mirai. I think it's one of the first botnets to use GRE flooding for DDoS attacks. This is a snippet from the actually Mirai code base available on the internet. I think, as you can see, there are a couple options to do GRE-based flooding. For example, number 6 and 7, they are for GRE-based IP flood or maybe GRE-based Ethernet flood. So those are some background of Protocol 47, what's the usage or how it can be abused.
Well, I think you stole everything I would have said, Ganesh, because about the time you were saying that this popped up in the last week or so, I started thinking, we've been reading a lot about, some of these new botnets or just these new DDoS campaigns in the last couple of weeks. And I sat there saying, I wonder if there's a correlation. And while it doesn't sound like we can say definitively, it looks very possible. Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely some correlation, but it's hard to say. I mean, maybe one way is to maybe what are the sources involved at that time in the June timeframe, and what are the sources involved at this time. But again, most of the botnets, they share lots of infrastructure, right? There's also revenue sharing. They will run their bots under their control, so it's hard to say. But nevertheless, GREs can be leveraged for huge DDoS attacks. That's been shown in the past. I think now we are seeing with the current scenarios also.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yeah, still jury is out. We're trying to dig in further to glean more information as much as we could. Let's see what we will come up with. But it seems to be there's definitely correlations with the large DDoS attacks, in my opinion.
I think the least surprising aspect of this is that we have another Mirai variant. How many do we have now? What's the number?
I don't know. It's hard to say, like you said, Andy.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I believe, but at this time, I mean, most often times, anytime any IoT-based partner is coming, everybody may be the first ones to jump. It's another Mirai variant. I think in this case, they're not saying a Mirai variant; they're saying Mirai, which may be the right way, but.
Yeah.
The functionality in the sense, the DDoS component, probably all of the botnet operators are leveraging the best capabilities, right? For example, even, I mean, it makes sense if you made a good program, maybe a good module, which does a tremendous job. Why I need to create it? I can just take it, that code base, and reuse it. I think that's exactly happened sometimes. That's one of the reasons. It's hard to say it's a variant, but I don't think it's a variant, but maybe probably they leverage the knowledge from Mirai-based .NET. Okay, we talked about it. Okay. And again, just to wrap up, to see the top 10 most sources probing. Again, similar to the probes, in this case, the scanning activity, it shows how much scanning activity happening on a specific port. Again, the table basically represents the port number, what's the rank this week, and what was the position last week, and how much is changed from the last week or so. For example, if you look at the number 1 and 2 positions, 23 and 445, the change is no change, basically. That means they remained at their positions from the last week also. Number 30 is AT TCP, which gained basically 4 positions from last week to land up on number 3 position. And followed by AT again, another alternate port. 0 is basically echo reply. We see, I mean, it's basically fabric. I think it's used for DDoS backscatter sometimes. And also, basically looking for, reaching for some devices. I think you typically see echo request as well as echo reply. 555 TCP, it's also very, very popular with some of the IoT partners. In this case, it's known for Android Debug Bridge, which is also leveraged by botnets for exploitation. Number 7 is 1433 for Microsoft SQL Server port. 22 TCP, we all know that it's related to Secure Shell SSH. And this kind of dropped about, I think, 5 positions from last week. I believe, so 80 took its position, and maybe dropped it. Number 10 is 81 TCP. I'm not going to discuss on that one, but I would like to point for the number 9 port, which is 2457 UDP. Basically, it was 46th position last week and gained 37 positions to land up in the top 10. So it kind of piqued my interest. I mean, one of the reasons is it's not a well-known port. And it's not that often we see not a well-known port coming up into the top 10, unless it's like some sort of like the application factories associated with. So I was thinking maybe there might be a new amplification vector, or maybe something happened. So in order to find, again, I based on our graphical view of our common backbone traffic. Here, I'm showing again the past 90 days happening on the specific port. Like you see, I mean, the traffic is okay with the little spikes happening like in the last 2-3 weeks, but at the peaks. But in the last 3-4 days, what's happening is, I think if you see at the graph, the volume is almost doubled in the sense in the last 2-3 months. Basically, it's kind of at the elevated levels. So, yeah, I think the last spike seems like I dropped it, but please keep in mind, I think when I was pulling up, it's not done for the whole day, entire 24 hours. Maybe that is one of the reasons we are seeing the after spike. But by discounting that, basically, it's still at the elevated levels of traffic. Okay, this gives me some information. Okay, let's see how many scanners scan sources are associated with on this port. Again, I think that there is a clear indication that the increase is related to increase in scanners also. For example, maybe about at 150 scan IPs per hour, it kind of increased to 500, maybe let me say 450, about 3 times increase. So that increase kind of seems like it. Maybe we could correlate of this activity. If you let me say, maybe at the start of May, I think around this time, mid of June, I think it could be like 2 to 3 times more than the traffic at that time. So that's good. There is some correlation. Is there anything we could figure it out about this port? More information. Unfortunately, I think this port is not well-known port, so there's a little information on it. So what I did is with a little bit of internet searches and trying to read something and looking at, there seems to be a new game released on Steam. I think it's released on February 2nd as an early release for, I think, some of the known players. What it is it's called Valiant Survival Game. I think it's a mythical, some sort of Vikings involved. I think that type of game, where in one of the posts they say that this specific the servers associated with this specific game uses 3 to 4 ports. All are UDP based, by the way, and they are 2456 to 2457, 2458. Basically, they're next to each other. So with that information, what I thought, maybe let's see what we can see in our graphical view. So kind of threw them, all of them 3 together. And again, no surprise here. I think these 3 seems to be coming at the same time. For example, since the start of maybe 820, just before, let's say 823, right? Just before maybe 2 to 3 weeks, there was a definite increase related to these ports. For example, the graph here is a stacked graph in the sense 2456 traffic is beneath 2457, basically the traffic of each other stacks and each outlet. So if I'm looking at all of the 3 ports are generating almost equal amounts of traffic. And there is a clear indication, I feel, that it is related to this new game. I think that's my conclusion. It's related to that new game. That's why we are seeing it. And maybe because of the volume increase, I mean, even though it's not that substantial, but it's good enough to basically land your top 10. So I couldn't able to pivot much to see if how many IPs are involved. I think the number of IP addresses are still the small number, but I think they're substantial enough to basically give some information about what this would be.
I'm not aware of this one, Ganesh, but this it's an interesting trend that, so many times one of us, I know I've done it multiple times, I look into something because there's a huge traffic spike on a certain port or a protocol, and really dig into it, it ends up being some new viral game came out, whether I heard of it or not. And when I line it up, I say, oh, wow, yeah, that's what it is. And it's not a security issue per se, but it's just interesting to see that, what are the different reasons for something to spike like this. And in this case, it sounds like it's either a new game or a new version to a game. People got excited and are playing it.